The Alpha team leader had only come that day to give a briefing, but the coordinates he gave during the operation would end a 15-year brotherhood. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison was a 37-year-old experienced Green Beret who had been serving with the 5th Special Forces Group for 15 years. On his third tour in Afghanistan, he was serving as the second-in-command of Alpha 52 team. He had been working with team leader Captain Derek Walsh since 2008, and their friendship had evolved into a bond beyond brotherhood. That Tuesday morning in the briefing room at Bagram Air Base, Walsh was giving information about a new mission. Jake and the other team members, Medic Sergeant Rodriguez, Communications Specialist Staff Sergeant Chen, Demolitions Expert Sergeant Williams, and 6 other Green Berets, were listening carefully. "Gentlemen," Walsh said, pointing to the digital map, "we have a high-value target in Kunar province. Taliban commander Khalid Hakim. According to our intelligence, he'll be meeting in the village tomorrow night." Jake studied the map. The village was very close to the Pakistan border and was considered a safe zone for the Taliban. "Extraction plan?" Jake asked. Walsh opened a second map. Lazia Bravo, 2 clicks north of the village. Coordinates 34.234, 71.456. Helicopters will be waiting for pickup at 0200. Jake noted the coordinates. He knew this area well. They had worked in the same region during a similar operation last year, but the coordinates Walsh gave didn't seem familiar to him. "Derek," Jake said after the operation briefing, "did you check the LZ coordinates? That area looks more like a creek bed than flat terrain." Walsh shrugged. "Intel double-checked. No problem." But Jake's stomach was churning. In 15 years of experience, he had never ignored his gut feelings. That evening, Jake checked the coordinates with his own GPS. The point Walsh had given was indeed a creek bed. It wasn't suitable for helicopter landing, but about 500 meters south, there was a perfect LZ area. Jake found Walsh. "Derek, there's a problem with the coordinates. Not suitable for the landing zone." Walsh gave Jake a strange look. "Jake, you've gotten too paranoid. Intel is correct, but I know that area." "Last year..." "Jake," Walsh interrupted, "I'm the team leader. We'll use the coordinates I gave." Jake's hair stood on end. In 15 years, Walsh had never acted like this. He always listened to team input. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Something was very wrong, but he couldn't quite understand what it was. The operation day arrived. Alpha 52 team flew toward Kunar province in a UH-60 Black Hawk. Jake's stomach was still churning, but he trusted his team, especially Walsh. The two had fought together in 3 countries and had saved each other's lives multiple times. At 22:30, they approached the target village. The team fast roped down and moved toward the target building. The operation was going according to plan. At 23:45, Khalid Hakim was captured. They encountered no resistance. It had gone too easily. "Alpha 52, package secured," Walsh reported via radio. Moving to LZ, the team began running toward the coordinates Walsh had given. Jake still thought the coordinates were wrong, but he followed his team leader's orders. At 01:30, when they reached the targeted LZ, Jake's fears came true. This place wasn't suitable for helicopter landing. Creek bed, rocks, no flat area whatsoever. "Walsh, this place won't work," Jake said. "Helicopter can't land." Walsh looked at his GPS. "Coordinates are correct. Pilot will handle it." Jake opened his radio. "Night Stalker 6, LZ, unsuitable. Repeat, LZ, unsuitable for landing." The pilot responded. "Alpha 52, alternative LV." Jake checked his own GPS. "Night Stalker 6, alternative LZ 500 meters south. Coordinates 34.231, 71.453. Negative," Walsh intervened. "Original coordinates stand." Jake looked at Walsh. This was madness. "Derek, what are you doing?" "Following orders," Walsh said in a cold tone. At that moment, Jake understood. This wasn't coincidence. Walsh had deliberately given wrong coordinates. But why? "Night Stalker 6, Jake said via radio. "Medical emergency, need immediate extraction at alternative coordinates." The pilot hesitated. "Alpha 52, Confirm with team leader. Walsh took the radio from Jake's hand. Night Stalker 6. Original coordinates. That's an order. Jake's head was spinning. Why was Walsh endangering his team? At 0150, the helicopter came and tried to land at the coordinates Walsh had given. But as Jake had said, the area wasn't suitable. The pilot had to make a forced landing. At that moment, everything went to hell. Heavy weapons fire began from the surrounding hills. RPGs exploded around the helicopter. This was an ambush. 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 Rodriguez shouted. The team immediately took defensive positions, but their position was terrible. In open terrain, no cover whatsoever. Jake realized that Walsh had deliberately led them into a trap. But why? The firefight lasted 3 hours. The helicopter took heavy damage. The pilot was wounded. Rodriguez was shot in the leg. Chen took shrapnel. The only thing on Jake's mind was getting his team out of there. Using his own GPS, he moved toward a safe position. Jake, where are you going? Walsh shouted. Saving the team, Jake said. You can't move without orders. Jake turned to Walsh. Your orders are killing us, Derek. At 060, backup helicopter arrived and rescued the team. But the damage was significant. Rodriguez was seriously wounded. Chen's condition was critical. When they returned to Bagram, Jake immediately started an investigation. He wanted to learn why they had been sent to wrong coordinates. But Walsh moved faster. He accused Jake of insubordination. Master Sergeant Morrison, said Colonel Patterson, according to Captain Walsh's report, you ignored orders and endangered the team. Jake was shocked. Sir, Walsh gave wrong coordinates. Enough, Patterson said. You're subject to Article 15 discipline. Jake's career was being ruined. Walsh was burying him. That night Jake found Walsh in the barracks. Derek, why? We fought together for 15 years. Why are you selling me out? Walsh gave Jake a cold look. Business. Jake. Nothing personal. Business? What business? Walsh didn't answer and left the room. Jake knew there was something else underneath this. He began investigating. A few days later, he spoke with communications specialist Chen. Chen was still in the hospital but conscious. Jake, Chen said, I saw something strange that night. Walsh was making encrypted communications before the operation, outside normal channels. With whom? I don't know, but the frequency was unusual. With the information Chen gave, Jake contacted an old friend who worked with the NSA. Master Sergeant Thompson now worked in the intelligence division. Thompson, Jake said on the phone. I need a favor. Off the record. Thompson hesitated. Jake, this could be risky. Tom, friends were killed. Help me. 2 weeks later, Thompson met Jake in a secret location. Jake, Thompson said, what I found will shock you. Walsh has been in contact with the Taliban. Jake's head stopped. What? In the last 6 months, Walsh has had meetings with Taliban intermediaries. He's also opened offshore bank accounts. How much money? $150,000. Recent deposits. Jake couldn't breathe. Walsh had sold his team for money. Even worse, Thompson continued, that operation was fake. Khalid Hakim isn't a real Taliban commander, just a local farmer. Jake's world collapsed. The entire operation was a trap arranged for Walsh to get Alpha 5-2 killed. Why did he want to kill us? Thompson showed the file. Your team found a Taliban treasure cache on a previous mission. Walsh stole that money, but you guys are witnesses. Jake remembered. 3 months ago in Kandahar, the Taliban money depot they had found. Walsh had done the inventory alone. Jake, Thompson said, Walsh tried to have you killed to silence you, but the plan didn't work because you changed the coordinates. Jake was going crazy with rage. His brother of 15 years had tried to kill him for money. Can we present this evidence through official channels? Thompson shook his head. Classified information. Can't use it in court. But there's another way. What? You can force Walsh into confrontation with a recording device. Jake agreed. The next night he found Walsh at the officers' club. He started recording the conversation with a hidden microphone. Derek, Jake said, we need to talk. Walsh put down his drink. Jake, I thought you dropped this. Rodriguez is still in the hospital. Chen has brain injury. Why Derek? Walsh looked around, then leaned forward. Jake, with the money I took from that Taliban cash, I can start a new life. But you guys are witnesses. Did you try to kill us? Walsh shrugged. Casualties happen in the military. Taliban ambush is normal. Jake's hands started trembling. 15 years, Derek. We were brothers. Brotherhood doesn't pay Jake. $2.3 million does. Jake had heard enough. He stopped the recording. The next day, Jake went to Colonel Patterson's office and played the recording. Patterson's face changed. Jesus Christ, Jake, is this real? Yes, sir. Walsh sold us out. Patterson immediately called CID. Walsh was arrested. During the court-martial process, Walsh was charged with multiple offenses: treason, conspiracy, attempted murder, theft. Jake spoke at the witness stand. Sir, the defendant was my brother for 15 years. But he tried to kill us for money. Walsh's lawyer tried to discredit Jake. Master Sergeant Morrison, how do we know you didn't also take a share from that cash? Jake answered, Sir, if I were guilty, why would I expose Walsh? The jury found Walsh guilty. He received a 25-year prison sentence. Jake's Article 15 discipline was dropped, and he received the Medal of Valor. But for Jake, the victory felt empty. A 15-year brotherhood had been sold for money. Rodriguez and Chen recovered, but none of them were the same as before. Jake completed his remaining tour and then retired. When he transitioned to civilian life, Jake began working in veteran affairs. He especially helped veterans who had experienced betrayal trauma. One day, an old Green Beret called him. Sergeant Major Morrison, he said, I'm Staff Sergeant Williams. My team leader is giving questionable orders. What should I do? Jake gave him this advice. Williams, brotherhood is sacred. But when brotherhood is sold for money, it's no longer brotherhood. Years later, Jake's story became a case study in Special Forces training. The principle of never trust blindly, even brothers, was taught. Jake occasionally came to Fort Bragg as a guest speaker. Gentlemen, he would tell new Green Berets, brotherhood is more important than anything. But true brotherhood is not sold for money. Walsh had written a letter from prison. Jake, I'm sorry. Greed defeated me. You did the right thing. Jake hadn't written back. Some betrayals were unforgivable. When Jake's grandson was accepted to military academy, he told him, Son, uniform means honor. But real honor is not selling your friends for money. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison's story showed this. Brotherhood is the most sacred value, but corruption destroys everything. That Tuesday morning when Walsh was giving the briefing, if Jake hadn't questioned the coordinates, the entire team could have died. Sometimes survival begins with questioning orders. Jake's legacy lived among the Green Berets. Trust but verify. Even with brothers, the coordinates Walsh gave had changed Jake's life. But at the same time, it had made him a hero. A 15-year brotherhood had ended in one day. But Jake's integrity would last forever. The Special Forces motto, De oppresso liber, to liberate the oppressed. Jake's story showed that sometimes the oppressor could be your own brother. Even in the military's most elite unit, corruption could be found. But true warriors fought for truth, even against brothers. Jake Morrison was such a warrior. By questioning the coordinates, he had saved not only his own life, but also the honor of the Special Forces. That Tuesday morning, Walsh's briefing had become the most important test of Jake's life. And he had passed that test with honor. When brotherhood was sold for money, it was no longer brotherhood, it was business. Jake knew this difference and acted accordingly. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison's story ended this way. Sometimes the hardest enemy is your closest friend. But integrity always wins. The experience Jake lived through was not just a personal victory for him, but a lesson for the entire military system. The Walsh case led to the Special Forces Command reviewing its security protocols. Now, no single person had the authority to determine coordinates in any operation. A multiple approval system was implemented. New procedures were created to prevent the trauma Jake experienced from happening again. At the Special Forces Museum at Fort Bragg, Jake's story was displayed in the Moral Courage section. Young soldiers learned about the dangers of blindly following orders by reading this story. Question the coordinates had become a symbolic slogan among Jake's teammates. This phrase meant checking not just physical coordinates, but moral coordinates as well. At Jake's retirement ceremony, the commander of the 5th Special Forces Group said, "Master Sergeant Morrison protected the sanctity of Brotherhood, while also not allowing its abuse. Being able to accomplish this duality is the mark of a true leader." At the ceremony, Walsh's former teammates were also present. They all paid their respects to Jake, acknowledging that their lives had been saved by his courage. Rodriguez, now fully recovered and working as a security officer, said in his speech at the ceremony, "Brother Jake didn't just save me physically that night. He also taught me what true brotherhood means. While Walsh was trying to kill us for our money, Jake risked his life for us." Chen had fully recovered from his brain injury and was working at a technology company. In his letter to Jake, he wrote, "Master Sergeant, if you hadn't listened to your instincts that night, I wouldn't be able to play with my children now. My debt to you will last a lifetime." When Jake received these letters, the anger he felt toward Walsh began to be replaced by sadness, because Walsh had once been a Green Beret raised with the same values. How had money changed him so much? To find the answer to this question, Jake began conducting research in the field of military psychology. He studied why soldiers became corrupt and what factors led to this change. As a result of his research, the Warrior Values Protection Program was developed. This program aimed to prevent the erosion of moral values of soldiers on long-term missions. The program included regular psychological evaluations, ethics training, and peer support systems. At Jake's suggestion, the basic principle of the program was determined as brotherhood responsibility. Brotherhood is not just protecting each other, Jake would say in training. It's also ensuring we stay on the right path. This approach aimed to prevent the repetition of the Walsh case. It taught soldiers to protect each other not only against physical dangers, but also against moral dangers. The program Jake developed eventually spread to NATO countries as well. Elite units like Turkish Special Forces, British SAS, German KSK integrated this program into their own training. The Global Ethical Leadership Award given to Jake at the International Special Forces Conference was proof that he had transformed his personal trauma into a universal value. In his speech at the awards ceremony, Jake said, "Walsh's betrayal caused me pain, but to make this pain meaningful, I turned it into a lesson. Now Special Forces soldiers all over the world are more conscious to protect their brotherhoods." In the last letter Walsh sent from prison, he wrote that he was aware of Jake's program and was proud of it. "Jake, you turned my mistake into the benefit of millions of soldiers. This might be the only good thing I did in my life, leading you to this path." When Jake read this letter, he felt that he could finally forgive Walsh. The pain of betrayal was still there, but this pain was no longer just destructive. It had become a constructive force. On the 10th anniversary of his retirement, Jake visited Walsh's prison. This encounter after 15 years was a turning point for both men. "Derek," Jake said in the prison visiting room, "I forgive you, but I don't forget." Walsh now looked old and tired. "Jake, you know that money drove me crazy, but with the program you created, you turned my mistake into the benefit of thousands of soldiers. This was salvation for me." After this encounter, Jake decided to write the full version of his story. His book Coordinates: A Green Beret's Story of Betrayal and Salvation became a classic in military literature. The last sentences of the book were, "That Tuesday morning, the wrong coordinates Derek gave me weren't just a physical location, they were also testing our moral coordinates. I found the right coordinates, and this taught me what true brotherhood means. Protecting each other from all kinds of dangers, from external enemies and internal enemies alike." Jake Morrison's story ended this way. What began as a betrayal story transformed into an experience that became the moral compass for millions of soldiers. The moment he questioned those coordinates, Jake didn't just save his team, he also paved the way for future generations of soldiers to protect their brotherhoods. Sometimes the greatest victories are born from the deepest pains. Jake Morrison was living proof of this. The impact of Jake's transformation extended far beyond military circles. His story reached civilian organizations, law enforcement agencies, and corporate leadership programs. The principles he developed for maintaining integrity under pressure became applicable across all sectors where trust and ethical decision-making were crucial. Jake was invited to speak at Harvard Business School about leadership ethics. Standing before future corporate executives, he shared how the same principles that governed special forces teams applied to business relationships. In the corporate world, Jake told the MBA students, "You may not face Taliban ambushes, but you'll face moral ambushes. The temptation to compromise values for profit is your battlefield." One student asked, "How do you maintain team loyalty when individual interests conflict with group goals?" Jake's answer was rooted in his military experience. True loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's having the courage to challenge decisions that endanger the mission or the team, even when that challenge comes at personal cost. The Harvard presentation led to consulting opportunities with Fortune 500 companies. Jake found himself helping corporate teams navigate ethical dilemmas that paralleled his military experiences. At a major defense contractor, Jake discovered procurement officials who were inflating costs and skimming profits, a civilian version of what Walsh had done with the Taliban treasure. His intervention led to a company-wide ethics overhaul and the prosecution of several executives. The uniform changes, Jake would tell his corporate clients, but the temptations remain the same. Power, money, and opportunity can corrupt anyone, anywhere. Jake's influence also reached international audiences. He was invited to address the United Nations peacekeeping forces on maintaining integrity during complex multinational operations. Peacekeepers face unique challenges, Jake explained to the diverse audience of soldiers from dozens of countries. You must maintain loyalty to your home nation while serving a global mission. The coordinates I'm talking about aren't just GPS positions. They're moral positions that guide all our decisions. The UN implemented Jake's coordinate verification protocol across all peacekeeping missions. Before any operation, teams were required to have multiple personnel verify not just tactical details, but ethical implications of their actions. Back in the United States, Jake's work with the Warrior Values Protection Program continued to evolve. The program had expanded to include family support systems, recognizing that moral injury affected not just service members but their loved ones. Jake's wife, Maria, became instrumental in developing the family component of the program. She had witnessed firsthand the toll that betrayal trauma took on military families. When Jake came home from that deployment, Maria shared in program training sessions, he wasn't just dealing with physical wounds. The betrayal by someone he trusted like a brother cut deeper than any enemy fire ever could. The couple's experience became a model for how families could support service members through moral injury recovery. Their approach emphasized communication, patience, and understanding the unique challenges faced by those who had experienced institutional betrayal. Jake's grandson, now a cadet at West Point, wrote his senior thesis on ethical leadership in small unit operations. The paper, titled Questioning Coordinates, When Subordinates Must Challenge Authority, became required reading for all incoming cadets. "My grandfather taught me that real courage isn't just facing enemy fire," the young cadet wrote. "It's having the strength to question authority when that authority is leading you astray." The thesis examined historical cases where junior personnel had prevented disasters by challenging senior leadership, from military operations to civilian situations like the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Jake's influence on military education extended beyond West Point. The Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, and all service branch schools incorporated his case study into their ethics curricula. At the Naval Academy, midshipmen studied how Jake's principles applied to maritime operations. At the Air Force Academy, cadets learned how questioning orders could prevent friendly fire incidents. Each service branch found applications relevant to their unique operational environment. The Morrison Doctrine, as military ethicists began calling it, established clear guidelines for when service members had not just the right, but the obligation to question orders. When orders violated laws of war or military regulations, when orders endangered personnel without clear tactical benefit, when orders served personal rather than mission interests, when orders contradicted established safety protocols, these guidelines were codified into military law, providing legal protection for service members who demonstrated moral courage in challenging inappropriate orders. Jake's work also influenced military justice reform. The Walsh case had revealed weaknesses in the military's ability to detect and prevent internal corruption. New oversight mechanisms were implemented across all branches. Random integrity inspections became standard in high-value operations. Multiple verification systems were required for any operation involving significant resources or potential for personal gain. Financial monitoring of military personnel in positions of authority became more sophisticated. The changes weren't just procedural, they were cultural. A new generation of military leaders emerged who understood that questioning and verification weren't signs of distrust, but expressions of responsible leadership. Jake received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to military ethics and national security. At the White House ceremony, the president noted that Jake's actions had prevented not just the loss of life in one operation, but potentially saved countless lives through the systemic changes his courage had inspired. Master Sergeant Morrison represents the best of American military tradition, the president said. He understood that true patriotism sometimes requires challenging those in authority, and that the greatest service to country comes from unwavering commitment to our highest values. The medal ceremony was attended by hundreds of military personnel whose lives had been affected by Jake's work, former students from his ethics programs, beneficiaries of the Warrior Values Protection Program, and current service members who had applied his principles in their own challenging situations. Among the attendees was Captain Jennifer Martinez, now a colonel, who had used Jake's coordinate verification protocol to prevent a disastrous friendly fire incident in Syria. Her quick thinking and willingness to question orders had saved an entire Allied unit. "Sir," she told Jake after the ceremony, "your story gave me the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Without your example, I don't know if I would have had the strength to challenge my commander." Stories like Martinez's continued to emerge from around the globe. Jake's principles had been applied in peacekeeping missions in Africa, anti-terrorism operations in Southeast Asia, and humanitarian missions in disaster zones worldwide. The ripple effects of that Tuesday morning briefing at Bagram continued to spread, touching lives and preventing tragedies decades after the original event. Jake's final public appearance was at Fort Bragg for the dedication of the Morrison Center for Military Ethics. The facility would serve as the permanent home for ethics training and research across all Special Forces units. In his speech at the dedication, Jake reflected on the journey that had begun with questioning a set of coordinates. "That morning when Derek gave us those coordinates, I had a choice. I could trust blindly, or I could verify. I chose verification, and that choice saved lives. But more importantly, it taught me that verification of coordinates, of orders, of our own moral positions, is not an act of distrust. It's an act of love for those we serve with, and those we serve." The Morrison Center would ensure that future generations of Special Forces operators would never face the isolation that Jake had experienced when questioning authority. The center provided resources, support, and legal protection for service members facing ethical dilemmas. As Jake concluded his speech, he looked out at an audience filled with Green Berets, families, and civilian supporters. Many were people whose lives had been changed by his willingness to question those coordinates so many years ago. "The coordinates Derek gave me that day were wrong in every way that mattered," Jake said. "But questioning them led me to the right coordinates, the moral coordinates that guide us all. Those coordinates point toward truth, justice, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves." Jake's legacy was secure. From a moment of betrayal had emerged a movement that strengthened the moral foundation of military service. The coordinates he had questioned had led not just to physical safety, but to ethical clarity that would guide future generations. In the end, Jake Morrison had proven that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the corruption that can grow within our own institutions. His victory was not just personal. It was a victory for every service member who would benefit from the protections and principles he had established. The wrong coordinates had led to the right path, and that path continued to guide others toward truth, honor, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. 25 years after that fateful briefing, Jake's story continued to inspire, protect, and guide. The coordinates he had questioned had become a compass for moral courage that would never stop pointing toward true north.